They auctioned her off at a charity gala, and the man who owned her paycheck won. Claire didn't go there to be seen. She went to keep her job, to smile politely, to survive one more obligation. But under the bright lights, her name was called, not to speak, not to be honored, but to be bid on. Laughter followed, a cruel joke about her being a widow, and then a number so high it didn't sound like generosity anymore. It sounded like control. Because when her boss raised his hand, Claire realized this night wasn't about charity. It was about power, about silence, about how easily dignity disappears when you're told to be grateful. This isn't a story about romance. It's about what happens when saying no feels too expensive. And this is the night Claire stopped pretending she was invisible. The navy dress lay across the back of the kitchen chair like a question she didn't want to answer. Claire Hayes stood there for a long moment, one hand resting lightly on the fabric as if the dress might suddenly speak and tell her what to do. The morning light coming in through the narrow window was soft and cool, catching the faint creases in the cotton and the small frayed thread along the seam she hadn't noticed before. It wasn't special, wasn't glamorous, just good enough, the kind of dress that wouldn't attract attention. That was all she ever wanted these days. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Another email reminder. She knew exactly what it would say before she even opened it. Cedar Falls Health Foundation. Annual charity gala and auction. Mandatory attendance for departmental representatives. The body of the email was cheerful, full of emojis and exclamation points that felt strangely tone-deaf for a Thursday morning. It mentioned the staff experience auction as if it were perfectly normal for employees to be placed under spotlights and bid on by wealthy donors for a fundraising dinner. Claire exhaled slow and tight. She set the phone down, pressed her palms against the counter, and let her shoulders slump for a moment. She hated this, hated the idea of being watched, judged, paraded on a stage like she had something to prove. After Mark died 6 years ago, she had endured more than enough of people looking at her with pity in their eyes. She'd spent months learning how to become invisible again, how to fade into the background where questions and sympathy couldn't reach her. She picked up the dress and carried it to her small bedroom. The house still smelled faintly like cedar left over from the nights Mark used to sand furniture in the garage. She sat at the edge of the bed and folded the dress neatly, placing it beside the clutch she rarely used. All of it felt like preparing for a performance she hadn't auditioned for. She didn't want to be noticed. She wanted to be useful, efficient, quietly reliable. Spreadsheets, donor lists, event schedules, that was her comfort zone. Not this. Her mind drifted back to the conversation earlier that day. Linda Carver had appeared beside her cubicle with a bright smile that fooled no one. "You're great with donors, Claire. The board wants each department to offer at least one person for the auction. You'll represent us beautifully." Claire had pushed her glasses up and said as evenly as she could, "Linda, I'm not a showpiece." Linda laughed short and sharp. "Don't be dramatic. It's for the kids." And that was that. A decision made somewhere above her head, sealed with a tight smile and a tone that tolerated no disagreement. Now sitting alone in her quiet bedroom, Claire thought again about not going. She imagined herself driving out toward the foothills, maybe picking up takeout from that little Mexican place, with the green door watching the sun set behind the ridge. Anything but the hotel ballroom, anything but standing under lights with strangers deciding whether she was worth a bid. But the thought barely formed before another took its place. She couldn't afford trouble. Not here. Not now. Cedar Falls wasn't big, and jobs with steady insurance were even smaller. At 38, she wasn't exactly the applicant companies lined up for, unless they wanted someone to organize filing systems or run front desks. And after the medical bills, after losing the house Mark had loved, after rebuilding from nothing, stability mattered. She rubbed her forehead, feeling that familiar tight ache behind her eyes. Even so, something inside her recoiled against the idea. It wasn't right. It didn't feel fair. But she told herself she could endure one night. She'd endured far worse. Her laptop chimed softly from the kitchen. Claire walked back, opened the lid, and saw a forwarded message from Linda with the subject line, "Program, Proof, Final, for Review." Just work, she told herself. Just logistics. She clicked to download the PDF, expecting to skim page numbers or look for typos. The document opened full of glossy photos from last year's gala. She scrolled past the introduction, past the sponsor list, until she reached the auction section. Lot #3 Dinner with Dr. Samuel Kent. Lot #4 A round of golf with board member Greg Sinclair. Lot #5 An evening tour of the new children's wing with Nurse Megan Shaw. Her eyes slowed as Lot #7 came into view. Lot #7 Dinner with Claire Hayes, Foundation Coordinator. Beneath it, in elegant serif font, known for her warmth and dedication behind the scenes. Below that, her own staff photo cropped into an oval she had never approved. Claire's breath caught. Her cursor hovered over the text as if by pointing at it she might make it disappear. But it didn't. It stayed there, polite and polished and permanent. Her name was already printed, already advertised, already promised to whoever had enough money and curiosity to claim an evening with her. A warmth spread through her chest, part anger, part disbelief, part something like shame. It wasn't a request. It wasn't a favor. It wasn't even a conversation. It was done. She closed the laptop softly, like one might close a door on a room too painful to walk into. Then she stood there, hands resting on the counter, eyes unfocused. Outside, a breeze rattled the dry leaves on the porch. The day moved on without her. Tomorrow she would have to show up. She would have to smile. She would have to stand under those lights. But tonight she let the quiet swallow her whole. She didn't realize she was gripping the back of the chair until her knuckles went white. What am I doing? The question rose up from somewhere, deep inside her, raw, trembling, unanswered. And as the evening settled around her small house, she knew this wasn't just about a dress or an auction. It was about the parts of her life she'd tried so hard to control, slipping out of her hands again. By 8:30, the foundation office already hummed with the low, tired sounds of a place that lived on coffee and deadlines. The fluorescent lights overhead cast a flat, pale wash over everything. Stacks of folders, blinking monitors, a half-dead plant in the corner no one quite remembered watering. Somewhere down the hall, a printer rattled to life and groaned through another job. Claire sat at her desk, pen in hand, working her way down yet another checklist. Table numbers, donor seating preferences, dietary restrictions. She had color-coded the entire ballroom in her spreadsheet: blue for board members, green for major donors, yellow for sponsors with special requests. She knew without looking where everyone would sit. Who couldn't be next to whom? Who needed to be near an exit in case their back started acting up? This at least made sense. Boxes to tick, columns to balance, problems with answers. Her computer chimed with an incoming message. She flicked her eyes to the corner of the screen and saw the subject line, Gala Program, Final Print Sent. A faint knot tightened in her stomach. She already knew her name was in that program. She'd seen it last night in the quiet kitchen, her face staring back from the PDF. Seeing it again now, in the cold light of morning, didn't help. She circled a note on her list, confirm vegetarian count, and tried to focus. It was easier to think about someone's mushroom allergy than about standing on a stage while strangers decided how much an evening with her was worth. Knocking, a voice sang out too bright for this early hour. Linda Carver appeared in the doorway, a clipboard hugged to her chest like a shield. Her lipstick was a little too red for daylight. Her perfume reached the desk half a second before she did. "Morning, Claire," Linda said, stepping into the office without waiting for an invitation. "Busy, I see." Claire set her pen down and leaned back slightly. "Trying to keep tonight from turning into chaos." "That's why you're so valuable," Linda replied. "You keep us from sinking." She held out the clipboard. "Speaking of which, I need a quick signature." Claire glanced down. A dense paragraph of tiny print filled the top half of the page, followed by a blank line and a date field. At the very top in bold, she read, "Participant liability and media release. Staff experience auction." Her jaw tightened. "What is this?" "Just standard stuff," Linda said lightly. "For everyone in the auction. Legal wants it on file." Claire's gaze stayed on the paper. "Linda, I never agreed to this. You put my name in the program." Linda shifted her weight, smile not moving. "The board approved the list. It's a great opportunity. Donors love relatable staff. And frankly, we need a normal face up there." One family-size casserole of relatability served warm. "I saw it," Claire said quietly. "Last night, lot number 7. my picture, my name. No one asked if I was comfortable with that. Linda sighed as if indulging a child. We talked yesterday. I told you the board wanted each department represented. You told me they wanted someone, Claire replied. You didn't tell me the decision was already made. Linda gave a faint shrug. Claire, this is how things work. The board moves quickly. We had to send the program to the printer. And you know, we're under pressure this year. Ethan is counting on this night to bring in serious money for the children's wing. On cue, as if summoned by his own name, Ethan Ward walked past the open door. He moved with that same quiet, intentional stride Claire had watched 100 times in the hallway. Charcoal suit, pressed white shirt, crisp silver at his temples, catching the light. He glanced in, gave a polite nod that included the whole room, but landed briefly on her, then continued down the corridor with a leather folder under his arm. He didn't hear Linda say his name. He didn't hear any of this. He never did. He floated on a different level where board members and city officials lived somewhere above the hum of printers and the clatter of keyboards. Linda followed his retreating figure with her eyes, then looked back at Claire. You see, he's under enough stress. Don't put him in a tough spot by making this a thing. There it was. The shift. This wasn't about Claire's comfort anymore. It was about not inconveniencing the man at the top. Heat flickered low in Claire's chest. A thing, she repeated. You're asking me to sign a release that says I'm okay being photographed, auctioned off, and paraded in front of people I file reports for? And I'm not supposed to have feelings about that. Linda's smile thinned. Let's not be melodramatic. No one is auctioning you off. It's just a dinner. You'll have a nice meal with someone kind enough to support the cause, talk about the foundation, smile for a photo. Easy. You're good at conversations. That's why I picked you. Picked. Like a chair or a tablecloth. Claire's mind slipped just for a heartbeat back to another kind of picking. Another kind of choice. Phone calls from numbers she didn't recognize. Voices on the other end saying words like delinquent and balance due. And we can work out a payment plan. Mrs. Hayes, if you just... She remembered sitting at a kitchen table in a different house, Mark's house, with stacks of bills and pharmacy receipts spread out like a losing hand of cards. She remembered the look on the loan officer's face when they'd begged for more time. The way people's eyes shifted when they realized the couple in front of them were not a success story but a warning. They had made decisions for her too. Banks, collectors, the insurance company that changed its terms mid-treatment. They had picked her as someone whose story could be trimmed to fit their spreadsheet. She'd promised herself after the dust settled and the house was gone that she would never again let herself be treated like a line item. Yet here she was. I don't like this, Claire said, forcing her voice to remain calm. I don't like how it was done. I don't like being told after the fact and then being handed a consent form to make it look like I agreed. Linda's smile slipped for the first time. Claire, you know I respect you, but this is bigger than you or me. The donors expect it. The board approved it. We've advertised it. Backing out now would make everyone look bad. Everyone. Not everything. Not the system. The people. And let's be honest, Linda added, softer, almost coaxing now. You've told me yourself you could use the job security. You're not exactly thrilled about the job market out there. This is you being a team player. Just this once. There it was. The knife under the velvet. Claire stared at the clipboard. The words blurred for a second, then snapped back into focus. I, the undersigned, consent to participate. Release any and all claims. Authorize use of my likeness. All the legal phrasing that turned flesh and blood discomfort into manageable risk for the organization. She picked up the pen, because not picking it up suddenly felt like reaching for a cliff's edge with her fingers, knowing there was nothing to catch her if she let go. The idea of starting over again, of sending resumes into the void, of explaining the gaps and the losses and the reasons, it made her chest tighten. Linda relaxed a fraction, as though the battle was already won. Thank you, she said. You're doing a good thing. Think about the families we're helping. This is nothing compared to what they go through. Claire wanted to say that was exactly the point, that having witnessed what families went through, she believed more than anyone that they deserved better than a spectacle. That staff did too. Instead, she lowered her eyes to the line near the bottom of the page. Slowly, with deliberate strokes, she wrote, Claire Hayes. Her handwriting looked small on the thick paper. She added the date in the space provided. Then, without really thinking, she drew a single faint line beneath it. Not dark enough for anyone else to notice, but clear enough to her own eyes. A mark, a quiet acknowledgement. This was a line she hadn't wanted to cross. She handed the clipboard back. Linda's smile returned bright and satisfied. Perfect. I'll get this to legal. We'll make you shine tonight, Claire. Claire watched her leave, the scent of perfume lingering in the doorway long after she was gone. Then she turned back to her screen cursor, blinking beside a half-finished note about gluten-free options, the normalcy of it almost insulting. On the seating chart, she moved one donor's name from table 8 to table 4. On the inside, some part of her felt like it too had been moved without her consent. And there was no easy way to move it back. The Cedar Falls Hotel always looked grander at night than it did during the day. Its old brick facade, softened by decades of wind and winter snow, seemed to stand a little taller under the warm glow of the exterior lanterns. Claire stepped out of her car and stood still for a moment, taking in the sight. The building felt too elegant for her navy dress, too polished for the knot of nerves sitting in her stomach. She closed the car door, gently smoothing the skirt of the dress as if it might magically fix the way she felt inside. The fabric hugged her just a little more closely than she liked. In the reflection of the hotel's revolving doors, she caught a glimpse of herself 38, with faint lines around her mouth and a tiredness beneath her eyes that no amount of makeup could soften. Tonight she felt every year of her age, every year since Mark died, every quiet night spent adjusting to a life she never asked for. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of citrus and polished wood. Staff moved briskly in dark uniforms, guiding guests toward the banquet hall. The soft, persistent hum of voices floated through the air. Claire followed the signs toward Gala Ballroom, the click of her low heels sounding too sharp against the marble floor. The ballroom doors were already open. Light spilled across the hallway, warm golden, almost theatrical. She paused at the threshold. Crystal chandeliers glimmered like suspended constellations. Round tables draped in ivory linen stretched in perfect formation across the room. Each centerpiece held a bouquet of white lilies, their scent subtle yet unmistakably elegant. A jazz trio played near the front, notes drifting like silk through the chatter of well-dressed guests. Claire's breath hitched slightly. She hadn't expected the room to feel overwhelming. At the staff registration table, a young volunteer smiled brightly. "Name, please, Claire Hayes." The volunteer rummaged through neatly arranged badges, lifted one, and handed it to her, a white rectangle with bold black letters. Auction participant. The words stung more than she anticipated. She pinned the badge to her dress with careful hands, as though the act might somehow lessen the discomfort. She stepped into the ballroom, keeping close to the wall at first. She watched the donors, men in tailored tuxedos, women in floor-length evening gowns, move with the kind of ease she never managed in crowds like these. Conversations flowed around her, the laughter soft but sharp enough to remind her she didn't quite belong. Claire recognized a few board members, their spouses in sparkling jewelry. 2 surgeons from the main hospital stood with a cluster of local business owners. She saw Dr. Kent gesturing enthusiastically toward the new children's wing plans, and a banker nodding politely as if he were already calculating tax benefits. Then her eyes drifted near the stage. Ethan Ward stood beneath one of the chandeliers, speaking with a city council member and a philanthropist whose name graced several major plaques in the hospital. Ethan wore a charcoal suit tonight, the fabric smooth and perfectly fitted. His posture was straight, confident, yet something in the tension of his shoulders hinted at the weight he always seemed to carry. Salt and pepper, hair crisp, collar no tie. A small rebellion against formality. The lighting caught the edges of his face, casting soft shadows that made him look older, yes, but also more human than the polished email signature photo she'd seen 100 times. He didn't notice her at first. She was glad. Claire moved toward an empty table, pretending to adjust the place cards even though they were already perfect. The lilies rustled faintly as she touched a petal. Their fragrance reminded her of church services, of somber mornings after Mark's funeral, when she couldn't bear the sight of flowers anymore. "What would you say if you saw me here?" she wondered silently. Pinned with a number, waiting to be bid on, Mark would have hated the spectacle. He would have joked to lighten her nerves, but then pulled her aside and told her she didn't owe anyone this performance. He'd always been better at seeing her than she was at seeing herself. A ripple of movement drew her eyes upward. Ethan was looking in her direction. It wasn't an intentional stare, more like a passing glance, but his expression changed when he recognized her. For a split second, something softened. Something almost concerned, as if he sensed the coil of discomfort tightening inside her. The moment lasted no more than a heartbeat. Then he looked away, face settling back into the composed CEO, calm she was used to seeing in staff meetings. Still, the flicker lingered in her mind. Claire Linda's voice sliced through the noise as she glided toward her. Tonight she wore a sequined dress that shimmered with every step. There you are. This is fabulous, isn't it? Fabulous. Yes, if you liked chandeliers and silent bidding wars over human beings. Linda leaned in, lowering her voice. Relax, will you? Remember, they're bidding to support the children's wing, not to buy you. Then she laughed, a light, airy sound meant to be harmless, but somehow the laugh made everything worse. As if the idea of being bought was a joke, one Claire should find amusing. Claire forced a tight smile. Right, of course. Just look pleasant when they call your name, Linda added, patting her arm. Donors love that. Before Claire could respond, the MC stepped onto the stage, microphone in hand. The jazz trio finished their set, and the room dimmed slightly, signaling the shift toward the main event. Ladies and gentlemen, the MC announced tonight we continue our tradition of celebrating the remarkable staff of Cedar Falls Health Foundation. Claire's heartbeat thudded unevenly. People moved toward their seats, murmuring with anticipation. A few donors glanced at their programs, flipping to the auction section. One man tapped his pen thoughtfully against the paper as if strategizing. Claire took a small step back, trying to find air. And that was when Ethan's gaze lifted again. This time, he wasn't glancing around the room. He was looking directly at her. No smile, no polite nod. Just a steady, searching look. In that narrow span of time, she saw something new, something uneasy, almost protective, before he masked it with the familiar professionalism he wore like armor. But the moment had already lodged itself somewhere deep inside her. Something was shifting. She couldn't name it, didn't trust it, didn't even welcome it. Yet she felt it. The kind of feeling that made the edges of the night blur just slightly into something she didn't yet understand. The MC's voice carried over the crowd, announcing the start of the staff auction. Applause scattered across the room. Conversations quieted. Claire's pulse quickened. She wasn't on stage yet, but she already felt the lights warming her skin. Claire stood just off stage, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles whitened. She could hear the applause rolling through the ballroom like polite waves. The auction had been going on for 20 minutes, long enough for her nerves to fray, but not long enough for her to make peace with what was about to happen. On stage, a young doctor from pediatrics grinned as the MC announced a winning bid of $10,000. A chorus of cheers followed. Someone whistled. Someone else joked about him buying dessert afterward. Everything felt light, easy, fun. The doctor jogged off the stage with a wink toward the crowd, and several donors laughed warmly as he returned to his seat. A nurse went next. She was lively, confident, with hair styled just so, and a dress that shimmered under the chandeliers. Bidding for her began instantly, $5,000, $8,000, $10,000, ending in a flurry at $12,000. The room loved her. It loved people who glowed. Claire did not glow. She stayed in the shadow of the curtain, smoothing the front of her dress with trembling fingers. She could feel a faint dampness on her palms. Her heart thudded hard enough that she wondered if someone close by could hear it. Behind her, someone whispered encouragement. She didn't turn. She couldn't. If she looked at another human being right now, she might crumble. And now, the MC's voice rose, cheerful as ever. We arrive at lot number 7. Her stomach tightened. Claire Hayes. He continued, the friendly face behind so many of our foundation efforts. Events, donor outreach, and the backbone of tonight's gala itself. Friendly face. Backbone. Words that felt kind in daily life, but suddenly felt like labels pasted onto her. Claire, come on up, she stepped forward. The lights hit her instantly, bright, blinding, hotter than she remembered from rehearsal. For a second, everything was white, a sea of indistinct shapes. As her eyes adjusted, faces sharpened. A few donors smiled politely. Others lifted their programs, scanning her section to remind themselves of her description. Some regarded her with mild surprise, as if she was older than expected, plainer than expected, more real than expected. Not young, not glamorous, just normal. Claire felt the familiar ache in her throat, but she kept her chin steady. She stood where the tape marked her place on the stage. "Let's begin at 500, the MC said. A hand went up, an older woman in a red shawl who bid with a kind smile. Claire felt a small rush of relief. 1,000, the MC called. Another hand lifted, a man near the middle table. 1,500, a hesitant pause. Then a quiet bid. The numbers inched forward, polite, restrained. Claire could feel every second dragging across her skin. Then, louder than necessary, a voice called, from the right side of the ballroom, "I'll go 2 grand. Heads turned. Tyler Briggs leaned back in his chair, one arm slung casually over the backrest. He was in his late 20s, wealthy from a tech startup he'd sold before turning 30, and known for showing up at these events with a mixture of money and arrogance. His bow tie hung undone around his neck, and his grin was just a little too wide. "I like a woman who looks like she can keep a house in order," he added. A ripple of awkward laughter moved through the room. Some chuckled outright, others shifted uncomfortably. The MC paused, caught off guard, then forced a bright smile as if nothing had happened. Heat crawled up Claire's neck. She kept her expression neutral, but inside a slow burn, ignited anger mixed with humiliation. Humiliation mixed with the familiar sting of being underestimated. The bid crept upward. 2,500. 3,000. 3,500. Tyler raised his hand again with a smirk. "Make it 5. The MC perked up. 5,000, wonderful, Tyler cut in, voice carrying through the room. "I've never had dinner with a widow before. Might be educational." The words slammed into Claire like a physical blow. A sharp inhale caught in her chest. Her shoulders flinched, not dramatically, not enough to cause a scene, but visibly enough that a few people in the front row exchanged glances of discomfort. Someone murmured something to their spouse. Someone else looked away entirely. The MC stumbled, searching for the next scripted line. Yes, well, our next bid," but the damage had already been done. That single word, widow, said with amusement, with casual dismissal, with the careless cruelty of someone who knew he'd never felt real loss, cracked open a piece of her she'd spent years trying to protect. She hadn't heard that word used publicly in a long time. Certainly not like that, as if it defined her. As if it was a curiosity. As if her grief was something to be examined over dinner like a wine menu. Claire kept breathing. Slow, measured, but her hands trembled where they hung at her sides. Some guests whispered. Some hid their discomfort behind forced laughter. A few, not enough, looked genuinely ashamed for the young man. Across the room, near the stage, she saw Ethan shift. He was no longer relaxed, his posture straightened, jaw tightening. Inside her chest, that slow burn of anger was rising, twisting with humiliation, pushing against every memory she had tried to move past. The room waited. The MC tried again. "Do we have 6,000? Claire swallowed, tasting metal in her mouth. All she wanted just for a second was to step off the stage and walk out into the cool night air. To disappear into the parking lot, get into her car, and drive until the lights of the city shrank behind her. But she didn't move. She stayed exactly where she was, exactly where she had been placed. Under the lights, under the eyes, under the weight of something she never agreed to carry. For a moment, the ballroom felt like it was holding its breath. The MC's voice faltered after Tyler's cruel remark, but he managed to force a cheerful tone back into place. "So, we're at $5,000. Do we have any more bids for this very dedicated member of our team?" Silence followed. Not polite silence, not expectant silence. A hollow, uncomfortable quiet that stretched out like an unwelcome spotlight. Claire stood under it, hands at her sides, heartbeat thrumming painfully against her ribs. She had never been so aware of her own pulse. It felt like everyone in the room must see it, must hear it, must know exactly how deeply that one-word widow had cut. She stared past the lights, trying to focus on some safe, distant point in the ballroom, but her vision blurred at the edges. Someone near the back shifted in their chair. A man hesitantly began to raise his paddle. For a brief second, Claire felt a strange mix of relief and embarrassment. At least someone was willing to. But then the man glanced sideways at Tyler. Tyler, lounging in his chair, his smirk now hanging lazily off one side of his face, drummed his fingers on the table like he already owned the evening. The man lowered his paddle. Claire's stomach dipped, her throat tightened. This wasn't charity. It wasn't support. It wasn't even good-natured bidding. It felt like a performance she hadn't auditioned for and was failing at. The MC tried again, voice thinner now. 5,000 going once. Another pause. Going twice, a voice cut cleanly through the room. Calm. Measured. Absolutely unmistakable. $120,000. It was not shouted. It didn't need to be. The words dropped into the ballroom like a stone into still water, sending ripples everywhere. Heads turned instantly. Claire's eyes snapped toward the sound. Ethan Ward sat at his table, paddle raised as casually as though he were confirming a lunch reservation. His expression didn't change, his posture didn't shift, but his gaze, steady, unblinking, was fixed on her. The MC actually coughed, thrown off balance. I'm sorry, did you say 120,000? Yes, Ethan replied, voice carrying easily through the stunned quiet. For the foundation, in exchange for a dinner with Miss Hayes. His tone held no hesitation, no apology, no elaborate justification, just a simple, firm truth. Across the room, Tyler's smirk collapsed into a tight-lipped sneer. He muttered something to the man beside him, too soft for most people to hear, but not soft enough to hide his irritation. Whispers broke out immediately. That much, for her, Ethan Ward, did you know they even knew each other? Is this appropriate? He must have a reason. $120,000, good Lord. Claire heard none of the words clearly, but she felt all of them. They buzzed around her like bees trapped under glass, part of her bristled anger rising hot and fast. How dare he, how dare anyone make such a scene over her? She felt like a headline that hadn't been written yet. Like she was about to become someone's rumor, someone's talking point, someone's whispered curiosity in hospital hallways. But beneath that anger, something else flickered. Relief. Sharp, fragile relief that Tyler Briggs would not be the one she was forced to sit across from at dinner. Relief that she wouldn't have to endure his smirks, his questions, his jokes about widows and housekeeping, and God knows what else. Relief that for reasons she couldn't comprehend, Ethan had stepped in. Still, her chest tightened with confusion. She didn't want to be saved. She didn't want to be the center of anything. And she definitely didn't want a man like Ethan, calm and collected and perched at the top of the hospital hierarchy, making grand gestures on her behalf. But she couldn't deny what she felt next, shock settling into her bones like cold water. The room had gone utterly still. The MC found his voice. 120,000. Going once. He looked around as though expecting someone else to challenge the bid. No one did. Tyler stared straight ahead, jaw tight. Going twice. Claire felt her lungs lock, as if breathing might somehow change the outcome. The gavel lifted. Sold. The MC declared, voice cracking slightly, to Mr. Ethan Ward for $120,000. Applause erupted, loud, enthusiastic, almost triumphant. But the sound struck Claire's ears strangely. It wasn't joyful. It didn't feel like celebration. It felt like clapping at her own auction block. Like applause for something she never agreed to be a part of. She stood frozen, staring out at faces blurred by stage lights, hearing only the rush of her own pulse beneath the applause. Ethan lowered his paddle with the same calm he'd raised it. For the first time, he looked away from her, down at the table, at his folded napkin, at anything other than the woman he'd just bid an extraordinary sum to have dinner with. $120,000. For her, the number echoed in her skull, strange and unreal. The applause faded into soft murmurs. Some donors smiled approvingly, impressed by the large contribution. Others exchanged pointed glances. More than a few looked bewildered. But none of them felt what she felt. Not the shock tightening her chest. Not the humiliation still simmering beneath her skin. Not the strange, confusing thread of gratitude that she wished she didn't feel at all. As the MC ushered her off stage, Claire walked toward the curtain with stiff, deliberate steps. Her heartbeat thrummed against her ribs like a trapped bird. Behind her, the applause faded, and the next auction lot was announced. But for Claire, the night had already split in two, the world before Ethan's bid and the world after. And she had no idea which world frightened her more. Claire slipped out through the side curtain the moment another staff member stepped on stage. She didn't wait for the polite escort back to the floor. She didn't want another pair of eyes on her, not tonight. The applause behind her felt muffled, distorted, like she was hearing it underwater. Her heels clicked too loudly on the marble as she made her way down a narrow hallway that led toward the service elevators. It was dimmer here, quieter, the distant hum of ballroom chatter fading into a low, blurry noise. The air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and cold, metal ordinary scents steadying in a way the ballroom had not been. She leaned back against the cool wall, closing her eyes. Her pulse was still racing too fast to steady too loud in her ears. She lifted a hand to her throat, pressing lightly as if she could calm herself through touch alone. $120,000. She could still hear the shock in the room, still see Tyler's face twisting, still feel the humiliation prickling beneath her skin. The worst part, she realized, wasn't even the bidding, it was the eyes. All those eyes judging whether she was worth anything at all. A faint footstep echoed from the far end of the hallway. She didn't look up. At first she assumed it was staff, maybe someone delivering trays or linens. But when the footsteps slowed, stopping a few feet away, she opened her eyes. Ethan stood there. No audience, no board members flanking him, no polished smile reserved for donors. Just him alone in a quiet hallway with his tie slightly loosened jacket unbuttoned, the crease between his brows deeper than usual. "Claire," he said softly. She straightened immediately. "Please tell me you didn't follow me." He didn't answer that. He stepped closer, not intruding, but close enough that she could see the tension in his jaw. "Are you all right?" She let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "Do I look all right?" He hesitated. "No." A tiny tremor passed through her chest. She crossed her arms, not out of defiance, but to hold herself together. "Was that really necessary?" she whispered, anger simmering beneath the surface. "That spectacle," Ethan's eyes darkened. What Tyler said was out of line. A bargain item, a joke, something men get to bid on and feel clever about. His expression shifted as if her words had hit a place he hadn't prepared for. He took a breath, measured and slow. "I've watched you keep this place running for years," he said quietly. "I've watched you do the jobs 5 people should be doing. I've watched you show up to every gala, every meeting, every crisis, and stand there like you're invisible." Claire blinked hard. Something in her throat tightened, and then Ethan continued, voice lower. "Now I heard him talk about you like you were something to laugh at." His jaw clenched. "I didn't think. I just knew I wasn't going to let him win." "Not like that." She stared at him, stunned, not by his words, but by the tone. She'd never heard Ethan Ward sound anything but completely controlled, a man whose emotions operated behind glass. But tonight the cracks were showing. The awful part was she didn't know whether to be grateful or furious. "You made everything worse," she said, her voice trembling despite her efforts. "Do you have any idea what people are going to say?" $120,000, Ethan. That's not a quiet gesture." "I know," he replied. "Then why did you do it?" "Because they were wrong about you." The hallway grew impossibly still. Claire felt herself swallow, felt the tension in her shoulders shift. Something about the way he said it, low, direct, almost pained, lodged itself deep inside her. But she couldn't let herself soften. Not yet. Not here. He stepped slightly closer. Not enough to crowd her, but enough to make her feel the warmth of his presence. "If you're uncomfortable with the dinner," he said gently, "we can let the foundation keep the money and forget that part of the bid. I didn't do this to corner you. I didn't bid for a prize." She looked up sharply. "I bid because what he said was wrong," Ethan continued. "Because I wasn't willing to sit there and pretend it was harmless." Claire looked away, staring at the service elevator doors. A thin crack of light reflected off the metal. She focused on that crack, trying to steady her emotions. I appreciate the intention, she managed. But intention doesn't erase the fact that I stood under a spotlight while two men argued over my worth. Ethan opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. For once, he didn't have a perfect answer. Her voice softened just a breath, but she kept the space between them firm. Then why does it still feel like I was auctioned off tonight? He didn't answer. The silence between them was thick, heavy, honest. For one fleeting moment, Claire saw something vulnerable in his eyes, regret maybe, or recognition. Something human, something unguarded. She pushed off the wall, straightening her shoulders. I need to get back, she said quietly. People will notice if I'm gone too long. She walked past him. He didn't reach for her. He didn't try to stop her, but his voice followed her down the hallway, soft and troubled. Claire, I truly am sorry. She didn't turn around. She kept walking the distance between them, stretching with every step, her breath tight in her chest. She didn't know what she felt, anger, confusion, something else she didn't want to name. But as she reached the end of the hallway, she knew one thing with complete certainty. This wasn't over. Not for her. Not for him. And not for whatever it was that had begun in the split second their eyes met under the hotel lights. 3 days passed before Claire heard anything from Ethan. Just a single email from his assistant, written in the same polite, carefully neutral tone she used for scheduling meetings with donors. Mr. Ward would like to arrange the charity dinner at your convenience. Please choose a location you're comfortable with. No rush, any time in the coming weeks. It was respectful, thoughtful, and somehow impossibly heavy. Claire closed the email and leaned back in her chair, staring at her ceiling tiles as if they might offer guidance. Saying no felt like retreating, not from him but from herself. From her dignity, from the part of her that wanted to face what had happened, instead of letting it haunt her. But saying yes felt dangerous. Yes felt like standing at the edge of a river she wasn't sure she could cross. Yet, yes also felt strangely necessary. She let the decision sit with her for a full day, carried it with her through spreadsheets, through donor calls, through a quiet dinner alone at her kitchen table. By the next morning, she knew the answer. She emailed back with a restaurant name, a small family-owned place by the Cedar River, known for its grilled trout and warm wooden booths. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't a place where CEOs went to impress people. It was a place where couples sat side by side, sharing plates and memories. A place where Mark had once taken her on a soft spring evening. Maybe that was why she chose it. Maybe it was the only place where she wouldn't feel like she was on display. Ethan arrived right on time. He stepped through the door, wearing a navy sport coat and an open-collar shirt, looking nothing like the untouchable man from board meetings. He paused briefly when he spotted her, then smiled, a real one, small and gentle. Claire, he said. Ethan. Her voice was steadier than she expected. The hostess guided them to a quiet booth along the windows, where the river shone silver blue under the early evening light. The walls were lined with photographs of weathered fishing boats and old riverfront docks, all framed in slightly scuffed wood. The space felt lived in, warm, safe. Their conversation began like two people reading from a script. How are things at the foundation? Busy. Gala follow-up is always messy. Yes, but it went well overall, except for certain parts. A pause. Yes, except for that. They ordered trout and salad water with lemon. Nothing extravagant. Somewhere between the bread basket and the main course, the stiffness between them began to ease, almost invisibly. Ethan was the first to let the mask slip. I should tell you, he began, tracing the rim of his glass with one fingertip. I'm divorced. Claire glanced up, mildly surprised. I didn't know. Most people don't. It's been 7 years. He offered a faint, self-deprecating smile. My ex-wife used to say I loved the job more than the family. There was no bitterness in his voice, just a tired sadness that suggested the accusation had once been a wound. Is that true? She asked softly. I think, he exhaled slowly. I think sometimes I used work as a shield. It was easier to be the man with answers than the man who didn't know how to fix his own home. A beat of silence passed. I have a son, he added. Micah. 15. He stays with me every other weekend. He pretends not to care about cars, but he asks about mine every time he visits. Claire smiled, small, warm, genuine. That sounds like a teenager. He's a good kid, Ethan said quietly. Better than I deserve some days. When their plates arrived, Claire found herself sharing in return words she rarely let leave her chest. My husband died when I was 32, she said. Cancer. The kind that starts in one place and ends everywhere. Ethan's fork stilled. I'm sorry, Claire. We fought it as long as we could, she continued, her voice steady but soft. The medical bills drained us. We took a second mortgage. After he died, I spent 3 years paying for months I'd already lived. And after all of that, the loneliness. She shook her head lightly. It felt like another kind of debt. Ethan didn't interrupt. He didn't offer cliches or apologies she didn't need. He just listened with the kind of attention that felt like a blanket being draped over her shoulders. When she finished, he said quietly, I knew your name long before the auction. Claire blinked. You did, he nodded. Every time something went wrong, someone would say, ask Claire. She'll know. Or, Claire already handled it. He took a sip of water. You were the person everyone trusted. And somehow I never knew how to cross that line between being your boss and being... He hesitated. A human being who noticed. Claire stared at him, caught off guard, noticed what his gaze met hers, steady and warm. When I raised that paddle, Claire, it wasn't because I wanted a night with you. It was because I couldn't stomach the way they talked about you. I couldn't sit there and pretend you were someone they could reduce with a remark. She held her breath. But his voice softened to almost a whisper. Sitting here now, I think I've wanted more than one night for a while. The world around them seemed to quiet the river outside, slowing to a gentle shimmer. Claire's heart pressed painfully against her ribs. She didn't answer right away. She just looked at him, really looked, and felt a mix of emotions so intricate she couldn't pull it apart. Surprise, gratitude, fear, a cautious warmth she wasn't ready to name. I don't know what to do with that, she whispered. He nodded, accepting the truth without flinching. You don't have to. Not tonight. Claire lowered her eyes to her plate, breath shaking just slightly. For the first time in years, something in her chest felt less heavy. But that didn't make it less terrifying. The Monday after the gala arrived with an unsettling normalcy, as if the weekend hadn't cracked something open in her life. Claire parked in her usual spot, walked through the same glass doors, greeted the receptionist. Everything looked the same, smelled the same. Even the stack of donor envelopes waiting on her desk felt like part of some quiet, relentless routine. But the air around her had shifted. The foundation newsletter sat printed on the corner of her desk, its headline announcing the gala's record-breaking numbers. And beneath it, in the local newspaper, a photo of the moment the gavel fell. Ethan's bid circled with dramatic flair. Claire herself was just a blurred figure in the background, but she recognized the shape of her shoulders, the way she was holding her breath. Even in a still image, she turned the paper face down. By mid-morning, she needed coffee badly enough to risk stepping into the break room. She pushed the door open, and the chatter inside cut off instantly. Megan and Jenna stood by the counter, mugs in hand. They exchanged a look, quick, guilty, unmistakable. Claire felt the temperature in the room drop. She forced a small smile, pretending she hadn't noticed anything, and walked to the coffee pot. The silence was loud. She lifted the carafe, poured slowly. Then Megan cleared her throat and said too brightly, "So, big night at the gala, huh?" Claire didn't turn. I mean, if I knew a dinner with him was worth 6 figures, I'd have signed up too. Jenna laughed softly, the kind of laugh people use when they know something is mean, but they enjoy the sting anyway. Guess the right kind of attention really pays off. Claire's hand tightened around the mug. They weren't whispering. They weren't even pretending. They were saying it right next to her, as if her presence didn't matter, as if she wasn't a person with ears and dignity. She had mentored both of them. Covered late calls for them. Helped them rewrite resumes. Brought soup when they were sick. And now, she set her mug down carefully before she dropped it. "Excuse me," she murmured, walking out with steady steps that betrayed none of the shaking beginning deep in her chest. In the restroom, she leaned over the sink and splashed cool water on her face. The fluorescent lights were harsh, unforgiving, illuminating every line she didn't want to see. She stared at her reflection at the exhaustion, sitting just beneath her eyes at the faint tremble in her jaw. A widow. Tyler's voice echoed in her memory, mocking careless. And now Megan's I'd have signed up too. The sting was the same. Different faces, same wound. She pressed her palms against the counter. She had survived bills she couldn't pay. She had survived nights sleeping in empty sheets. She had survived rebuilding her life alone. But this quiet, insidious erosion of respect, she hadn't prepared for this. Later, during the monthly planning meeting, Claire took her usual seat near the end of the conference table. She kept her notes neatly aligned, her pen still. The discussion flowed around her project timelines, upcoming donor visits, budget approvals. She said almost nothing. Across the glass wall, Ethan entered the room next door for a board pre-meeting. Even from the hallway, the man filled space. Confident stride sleeves, slightly rolled up hair a bit disheveled from the river breeze the night before. He glanced toward the conference room. Their eyes met through the glass. It was a split second, barely enough to register, but in that split second his expression changed. The calm professional exterior faltered, replaced by something concerned, gentle. A silent question, what happened? Claire looked away first. She didn't trust her face not to give something away. The meeting ended quickly. Chairs scraped. Papers gathered. As people filtered out, Linda touched Claire's elbow. "Walk with me," she asked, voice soft, so soft it made Claire wary. They stepped into the hallway. Linda's heels clicked lightly against the tile. "I know people are talking," Linda said, lowering her voice as if sharing something confidential. "It's unfortunate." Claire held her breath. "Unfortunate," she repeated. The word tasted like metal. Linda gave a sympathetic tilt of her head. "You know how staff gossip is. Things get exaggerated. But for now, I think it's best if you keep a little distance from Ethan at work, just so we don't fuel the story." The sentence landed like a slap. So Claire said slowly, "I'm the problem. That's not what I said. But it's what you meant." Linda exhaled long and rehearsed. "Look, Claire, you're a valuable part of the team. But optics matter, and right now, every time Ethan looks your way, people notice." Claire stared at her. "You know," she said quietly, "I didn't ask for any of this." "I know," Linda replied gently, but her eyes didn't match the tone. "But still, let's just be mindful." Mindful. Another word for disappear. Make yourself smaller. Stop being an inconvenience. Linda patted her arm, the same condescending gesture she used on overwhelmed interns. Then she walked off, humming lightly, as though she'd delivered helpful advice rather than another cut Claire would carry through the day. The hallway emptied. Claire stood alone, her breath unsteady. In the glass reflection, she saw herself again, blurred around the edges like the photo in the paper. Someone to talk about. Someone to judge. Someone to keep their distance from. Not once had anyone asked how she felt. Not one person had said, "Are you all right?" A quietness settled around her, not peaceful quiet, but the kind that follows a door shutting. After Mark, she'd known the depth of isolation more intimately than she ever wanted. But she had built something since then. A life, a place, a sense of belonging. And in the span of a few days, it felt like it was unraveling again. She stood in that empty hallway, eyes stinging, jaw tight, and for the first time since the gala, she wondered if saying yes to that dinner had been a mistake. The kind of mistake people love turning into a story. The boardroom door clicked shut behind Ethan with a soft finality that felt louder than any argument. Inside, the polished oak table still gleamed under the recessed lights. Coffee cups sat half empty, untouched notes scattered near leather folders. On the wall, a framed photo of the children's wing opening captured last year's ribbon-cutting ceremony, smiling faces, bright balloons, Ethan's arm around the board chair's shoulders. The air still carried the echo of the conversation he'd just walked out of. "Your bid was generous," one board member had begun adjusting his glasses. "But given your position, Ethan, it raised questions." Questions. That was the polite word. Another board member, a woman who usually championed his initiatives, had spoken more carefully. We are grateful for the donation, but a six-figure bid on your own staff member. For a dinner, people talk. The power dynamics are complicated. Ethan had folded his hands to keep them from tightening into fists. I understand the concerns, he'd said evenly. But the donation stands. The pediatric unit will expand because of it. And for the record, Claire Hayes is one of the most professional, dedicated employees we have. My respect for her was the only reason I stepped in when I did. The board chair, an older man with neatly combed white hair, had steepled his fingers. No one is questioning her competence, Ethan. But optics matter. To avoid any conflict of interest or appearance of favoritism, perhaps Miss Hayes should be reassigned away from direct contact with your office. Reassigned. Sanitized. Moved like furniture. Ethan's jaw had clenched. Claire hasn't done anything wrong. We're not suggesting she has, the chair replied. In fact, there's an opening for community outreach director. It's a step up, different reporting line. HR believes it could be an excellent opportunity for everyone. For everyone. He knew what that meant. We get to keep the money, keep the reputation, and tidy up the story. Now, standing in his own office, hours later, Ethan stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawl of city lights. Cedar Falls glimmered below cars, moving like tiny streams of light through the dark. The glass reflected his face back at him, tired, tense, older than he felt. He hated the idea of Claire being moved like a piece on a chessboard, but he hated even more the thought of her walking through hallways where whispers followed her like shadows. He checked the time. She'd be finishing up soon. He sent the message anyway. Can you stop by my office before you leave for the day? Ethan. When Claire stepped through the door 40 minutes later, the room suddenly felt too large, too formal. His desk, a dark, imposing slab of wood, seemed like a barrier instead of a workspace. Close the door, please, he said gentler than he meant to. She did. Her expression was calm, but there was a tightness around her mouth that hadn't been there before the gala. She took a few steps forward, stopping at the edge of the seating area by the window, not at his desk. You wanted to see me? She asked. Yes. He moved away from the desk, choosing to sit on one of the armchairs instead. He gestured to the other. Please. After a brief hesitation, she sat her back straight, hands clasped in her lap. He took a breath. The board met this afternoon. They brought up the auction. Of course they did, she said quietly. No surprise in her voice, just resignation. They were concerned. Ethan continued, forcing his words to stay measured. About how it looked. About the fact that he paused, that I bid on you. She watched him without blinking. And then I defended my decision, he said. I emphasized the size of the donation. The patients who will benefit. Your professionalism. The fact that you've earned every bit of respect I have for you. A flicker of emotion crossed her face, too quick to name. But he added the word heavy in his mouth. The board chair suggested that, to avoid any conflict of interest, you be reassigned away from direct contact with my office. There it was. Her fingers tightened faintly in her lap. Reassigned. He leaned forward. Claire, there's an opening for community outreach director. It's a true promotion, more autonomy, more leadership, a higher salary. HR believes it might be a good solution. Her eyes narrowed just slightly. A solution, she repeated. He pressed on, wanting to get to the part he hoped would show his intent. You'd report to another VP, not to me. It would create clear boundaries. No one could accuse you of benefiting from. From what? She cut in, her voice suddenly sharp. From being the woman you bid 6 figures on. The words hit him like a slap. That's not what I meant, he said quickly. I'm trying to protect you from more gossip. From being a target. This role would give you more authority, more independence. You deserve that. She stared at him. So the answer, Claire said slowly, is to move me like a chess piece. Claire, because your board is uncomfortable with the story they helped create, she continued, her tone low, but shaking. You want to place me somewhere less visible, somewhere that makes them feel better. That's not fair, Ethan protested. No one is trying to hide you. I'm trying to protect me, she finished, standing abruptly. You keep saying that. He rose, too heart-pounding. Because it's true. She shook her head. No. You're protecting you. Your board. Your reputation. I'm the messy little story you want out of your office. Stop, he said more harshly than he intended. That's not how I see you. Isn't it? Her laugh was soft, bitter. I walked into work this week and became a rumor. I walked into the break room and heard women I mentored imply I auctioned myself for career gains. And now the man who raised the paddle like a hero wants to move me to a different square on the board so everyone can feel better about themselves. Claire, listen to me, Ethan said, stepping closer. This role is real, important. I wouldn't offer it if I didn't believe in you. I'm not trying to get rid of you. I'm trying to give you space to breathe without 10,000 eyes watching your every move. Her eyes shone now, but she refused to let the tears fall. I let myself believe, she whispered, voice cracking, that maybe after everything I've been through, everything I survived, someone finally saw me. Not as a file or a widow or a good employee. Me. He swallowed. I do see you. She shook her head again, slower this time. No, she said the word trembling. Now I see exactly what you see when you look at me. He waited, dread twisting in his chest. Risk. The word dropped between them, like glass shattering whatever fragile trust had started to form. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The city lights blinked beyond the window, indifferent. Claire reached for her ID badge, the plastic cool against her fingers. She unclipped it from her blouse and set it on the edge of his desk. It rested there, a small, simple object that suddenly looked like a verdict. His heart lurched. Claire, I'm not quitting, she said, quickly picking the badge up again, fingers closing around it as if reclaiming a piece of herself. I've worked too hard to build this life. I'm not walking away because the board or the gossip or you are uncomfortable. Relief washed through him for a split second until she added more quietly, but I won't ever look at you the same way again. He flinched. She clipped the badge back onto her blouse, shoulders squared. Tell HR I'll consider the position, she said. Not because it's your solution, because I will not spend the rest of my time here walking through hallways like a cautionary tale. Claire, he tried again, the name a plea now. Please. Let me explain this better. There's nothing left to explain, she said, backing toward the door. You made a choice in that boardroom. I just got to hear about it secondhand. She opened the door, then paused, her profile outlined against the corridor light. You once told me you raised that paddle because they were wrong about me, she said, without turning. Tonight you showed me something else. What? He asked, voice hoarse. That even the people who claim to see you, she whispered, will still move you out of the way when you become inconvenient. The door closed softly behind her, and for the first time since the gala, Ethan realized that the silence in his office wasn't just quiet. It was the sound of something breaking. The small house felt bigger in the dark, quieter, older, more honest. She kicked off her shoes by the door and sank onto the couch she'd had since before Mark died. The fabric was worn at the edges, soft from years of use, the only place where she felt safe enough to unravel. The phone buzzed beside her, Laura calling. Her older sister rarely phoned this late unless she sensed something was wrong, sisterly intuition honed over decades. Claire answered. Hey, you sound awful, Laura said immediately. What happened? Claire let out a shaky laugh. Where do I start? She told her everything. Not the sanitized, work-friendly version, not the polite summary she gave strangers. She told Laura about the auction, about Tyler's cruel comment, about Ethan's overwhelming bid, about the gossip that followed her like a stain she couldn't scrub off. And finally, haltingly, she told her about the conversation in Ethan's office. Laura listened without interrupting, without offering the quick comfort that always felt too easy. When Claire finished, her voice raw, Laura said quietly, You sound tired, Claire. Not just from this week, from years. Claire pressed her eyes shut. I am tired. I'm tired of men deciding how much of me they can handle. I'm tired of rearranging myself so people won't be uncomfortable. I'm tired of being something they talk about instead of talked to. There it was, the truth she hadn't admitted even to herself. I survived so much, Claire whispered, voice trembling. You just forget sometimes that you're allowed to take up space. Claire curled into the couch, letting the words settle inside her. Allowed to take up space. It sounded like a foreign language. Across town, Ethan sat alone in a diner that stayed open past midnight. The fluorescent lights hummed softly above him, reflecting off chrome napkin holders and polished countertops. The place smelled faintly of bacon grease and burnt coffee, comforting in a way expensive restaurants never were. George slid into the booth across from him, shrugging out of his wool coat. A retired physician in his 70s, George had known Ethan long before he ever became CEO, back when he was a young administrative intern trying to make sense of hospital politics. "You look like hell," George said, pouring himself a cup of coffee without asking. "I feel like it," Ethan admitted. "So," George said, leaning back, "tell me why I got a text at 11 at night saying you messed up something important. That's usually code for you stepping on your own foot." Ethan exhaled, through his teeth, frustration and regret mixing in his chest. "I tried to fix something I shouldn't have tried to fix." "Ah," George said, as if recognizing a familiar ailment. "A classic ward move." Ethan frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," George said, stirring sugar into his cup, "you've spent your whole life making problems disappear by outworking them, outthinking them, or outdonating them. But people," he tapped a finger on the table for emphasis, "are not spreadsheets." Ethan looked away, jaw tight. George studied him, then added, "You tried to fix her life for her. That never works." "I wasn't trying to fix her life," Ethan said too quickly. "I was trying to keep her safe. The gossip, the board, the perception that matters to you." George interrupted gently. "Not necessarily to her." Ethan felt the words land heavily. He remembered his ex-wife's voice years ago. "You're always trying to manage everything except your own emotions." He had hated that accusation. But now, he could hear the echo of it in Claire's voice earlier. He ran a hand through his hair. "I didn't want her to be hurt anymore." "You can't prevent pain," George said, shrugging. "You can only walk with someone through it. You tried to control the narrative, instead of standing beside her in it." Ethan stared at the scratched diner tabletop for a long moment. George softened his tone. "You care about her. That much is obvious. But you made a choice in that boardroom that wasn't about her. It was about keeping everything tidy." He nodded slowly. "She told me I saw her as a risk." "And what do you say to that?" George asked. "I say..." Ethan swallowed. "She was right to feel that." George didn't smile or nod or reassure him. He simply asked, "So, what are you going to do now?" Ethan's response came quietly but firmly. "I'm going to stop thinking about what protects me." He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and began typing an email. To Board Chair HR Director, subject follow-up and policy review request. He wrote, "I'd like to formally address the auction incident and my own role in creating a situation that has negatively impacted a staff member. I request a meeting to review our policies on staff participation in donor events, accountability measures for leadership, including myself, and the steps necessary to restore transparency and trust." He read it twice, then pressed send. George raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like a man inviting consequences." Ethan nodded. "If there are consequences, I'll take them. I will not let her carry this alone." George leaned back with a small approving sigh. Finally, something money can't fix but integrity can. Ethan looked out the diner window at the nearly empty street, the night breeze rustling the leaves along the sidewalk. For the first time in days, he felt something loosen, an old familiar armor cracking open. He wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring. But he knew he wasn't going to hide behind control anymore. The meeting room on the 4th floor had always felt too formal for Claire's taste. Quiet carpets, a long oak table, high-backed chairs that looked like they belonged in a courtroom rather than a hospital foundation. She had taken minutes in this room hundreds of times. She had poured water for board members, arranged packets, double-checked microphones. But she had never once entered expecting to speak. Today, she almost didn't walk through the door at all. She had considered declining the invitation, letting HR and Ethan handle whatever needed to be said. But after everything, the whispers, the assumptions, the humiliation on stage, she was finished being spoken about instead of spoken to. So she came. Ethan stood when she entered. His expression was composed, but there was a quiet intensity in his eyes, something like gratitude, something like fear of what might happen next. The HR director nodded at her. A few board members murmured polite greetings. One or two looked uneasy, as if she was a reminder of something they wished would disappear from the agenda. Claire took a seat, spine straight, hands folded in her lap. Ethan began. "I'd like to open by acknowledging the events at the gala," he said, voice steady. "My bid was intended to support the children's wing. I don't regret the donation, but I do regret not anticipating the impact it would have on Miss Hayes and on the culture of this organization." A ripple of quiet swept across the table. He continued, "I take responsibility for my part in what happened. The optics, the discomfort, the mixed messages it created for staff. And I'd like to propose that we reconsider staff participation in future charity auctions. Specifically, ending the practice of auctioning off employees for donor entertainment." The HR director nodded thoughtfully. One board member made a small sound of agreement. Then the chair turned to Claire. "Miss Hayes, would you like to add anything?" She hadn't prepared a speech. She wasn't here to impress anyone. She simply took a breath, remembering Laura's voice. "You're allowed to take up space." "When I stood on that stage," Claire began, "I felt like I was back in one of the hardest moments of my life. Not because of the bidding, because of the laughter." A few board members shifted uncomfortably. "When Mr. Briggs made that comment about widows," she continued, voice still, "even I felt something open, a wound I thought had healed. And when people laughed, even nervously, it told me exactly what space I occupied in that room." She looked down for a moment, then back up. "I am proud of the work I do here. I love this place, I love the mission, and I know the funds raised will do real good. But no cause is worth the dignity of the people who serve it." Silence settled deep and heavy. "I'm not here to ask you to punish anyone," she said. "I'm not here to defend myself. My record stands on its own. I'm here to say this: if you believe I am an asset to this organization, treat me like one. If you don't, please be honest enough to say so." No one looked away this time. The board chair, a man in his 70s, with kind eyes, leaned forward on his elbows. It was the first time Claire had ever seen him regard her as anything other than part of the staff background. "Miss Hayes," he said slowly, "I don't think we fully understood what that night cost you." "It cost many people something," Claire replied gently. "I'm just the one who stood on the stage." Another long silence stretched, this one different. The HR director cleared her throat. "We've reviewed the community outreach director position. It is a legitimate promotion, more leadership, more direct involvement with community programming. And importantly, it removes the reporting line conflict without sidelining Miss Hayes." One board member added, "We also need stronger ethics guidelines. Staff should never be put in a vulnerable position for the sake of fundraising." The dinner auction has run its course. It's time for a new model. Claire felt something shift inside her, a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding, finally releasing. The chair nodded. "Let the minutes reflect. The foundation will end the practice of auctioning staff experiences. We will strengthen guidelines protecting employees during public fundraising events. And Miss Hayes will be offered the Community Outreach Director role with full acknowledgement that it is a promotion earned on merit, not a remedy for scandal." Claire absorbed the words slowly, like light warming cold skin. People weren't clapping, they weren't cheering, but there was a quiet respect in the room that hadn't been there before, a recognition. The meeting adjourned. Chairs moved, papers stacked, quiet conversations resumed. As Claire stood, the board chair approached her, not with the brisk efficiency she was used to, but with the steady, intentional walk of someone who wanted to say something meaningful. He stopped beside her. "In 20 minutes, he said softly, "you did more for this institution than most people do in 20 years. Claire blinked, taken aback. He added with a warm, sincere nod, "We're lucky to have you, Miss Hayes." And just like that, her dignity, so battered, so bruised, felt like it had found its footing again. Not because someone handed it back. As she walked out of the boardroom, the hallway looked different. Brighter somehow. Or maybe it was her, not the world, that had changed. Still a question lingered at the edges of her thoughts, unresolved and heavier than the rest. Would Ethan still be standing beside her, or had something broken too deeply to mend? Not yet. The weeks that followed felt strangely steady, almost peaceful in a way Claire hadn't expected. Her new role as community outreach director came with early mornings and long afternoons spent driving to local schools, community centers, and small-town libraries. She organized health fairs in gymnasiums that smelled faintly of old basketballs, set up blood pressure stations in church basements, and worked with volunteers who cared less about donor politics and more about their neighbors. She came home exhausted most evenings, but it was a good tired, an earned kind of tired that settled into her bones like warm sand. For the first time in years, she felt like she wasn't just running to survive. She was building something. And Ethan kept his distance. There were emails, brief, professional, respectful, updates on projects, occasional questions about scheduling. No accidental drop-bys, no lingering looks. He honored the invisible boundary she had drawn in the boardroom. Some days she was grateful for that space. Some days she hated how empty it felt. One Thursday evening, after a long day helping a rural community clinic set up a screening event, Claire arrived home, craving nothing more than a hot shower and silence. She hung her jacket by the door, kicked off her shoes, and had just started running the tap when she heard a knock. She froze. It was too late for neighbors, too soft for delivery drivers. She wrapped a towel around her damp hair and opened the door halfway. Ethan stood on her porch. No suit. No polished veneer, just jeans, a dark sweater, and a small brown paper bag in his hands. From the River restaurant. Her breath caught. He paused, clearing his throat. I brought dinner. Only if you'll let me in. He didn't push the door. He didn't lean in. He simply waited. Claire hesitated long enough for him to notice. Then stepped back, opening the door wider. You can come in. He entered quietly, setting the bag on her kitchen counter. The familiar smell of grilled trout floated into the room, filling the space between them. For a moment, neither spoke. Finally, Claire crossed her arms lightly. You didn't have to do this. I know, Ethan said. But I needed to talk to you. And not at work. She nodded, once guarded, but listening. He didn't sit. He didn't make himself at home. He just looked at her carefully, like someone trying not to assume more than he'd been given. I'm not here to defend myself, he began. She blinked, surprised. I'm here to tell you I'm sorry, he continued quietly. Not for the bit I'd do that part again, but for everything that came after. For making you feel like a problem to be solved instead of a person I care about. The words hung in the soft kitchen light. I've spent most of my life believing the best way to help people is to fix things, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. That's how I handled my marriage. That's how I handled my job. And that's how I handled you. He lifted a hand slightly, as if asking permission to be honest. When I raised that paddle, it was instinct. But every moment afterward, he shook his head. That was me trying not to be a coward. Trying to undo something with logic that began with emotion. Claire's breath trembled just a little. He continued, voice low. I'm not asking for one night, Claire. I'm not asking for a perfect ending. I'm asking for chances. She looked at him, really looked at him. The exhaustion around his eyes. The sincerity in the way he stood, not too close, not too far. He swallowed. Chances to show up, to listen, to be here without trying to fix you or hide you, to be something honest in your life if you'll let me. Her fingers tightened on the towel around her hair. And if all you ever want from me is a professional relationship, Ethan said, steady as stone, I'll respect that, completely. I won't push. I won't drift around the edges, hoping for more. He took a slow breath. But if even a part of you wonders, what we could be just wonders, I'd like to find out. Slowly. In the daylight, no bidding paddles involved. A small, uneven laugh escaped her before she could stop it. You and that paddle. It's my least favorite object, he said softly. And that includes the treadmill Micah makes me use every other weekend. The joke loosened something in her chest. Still, her heart thudded painfully. Because she cared. Because she feared caring more. Because she had lost a husband once, and life had taught her that the world could shatter without warning. She took a long breath. I'm not promising happy endings, she said. I'm not asking for them, he replied. I'm promising honesty, she continued, her voice steadying. I can promise that. And I need honesty in return. "You have it," he said immediately. "Every word." She looked down at the brown paper bag. The smell of trout and roasted potatoes drifted upward, familiar and grounding. Then she looked back at him. "If you can live with that," she said softly, "you can stay for dinner." He didn't smile widely. He didn't move quickly. He just exhaled a quiet, grateful breath that sounded like relief. "I'd like that," he murmured. Claire took the bag, turned toward the counter, and began unpacking the containers, while Ethan stepped beside her to help, careful, respectful, leaving space but being present. Not fixing, just being there. It was, she realized, their real beginning. A year has a way of softening the sharpest memories. The auction, the stage lights, the laughter that cut like glass, those moments still lived in Claire, but the edges weren't as jagged now. They had become part of the landscape of her life, not the defining shape of it. Cedar Falls carried the crisp bite of early autumn. Leaves swirled in golden spirals along the sidewalks as the wind drifted in from the river. The air smelled of wood smoke and the first hints of winter. Claire walked through the lobby of the foundation building, a stack of programs tucked under her arm, her scarf trailing behind her. She moved with a confidence that surprised her sometimes, like someone who finally understood she belonged here, not because anyone allowed her to, but because she earned it. 1 year into her role as community outreach director, she had built programs that were small but mighty. Weekend health screenings, a family support line, partnerships with local churches and community centers. She felt tired often, but it was the kind of tired that came from work she believed in. And in the quieter corners of her life, Ethan was still there. Slow, steady, imperfect, human. They had learned how to navigate each other's fragile spots. She had met his son Micah, a lanky teenager who pretended not to like her but lit up whenever she remembered his favorite sports team. Ethan had been there for her on the days when grief came out of nowhere, birthdays, anniversaries, rainy Tuesdays that felt too familiar. He didn't try to fix her anymore. Sometimes he just sat beside her, wordless, letting silence be the thing that held her together. Tonight was the Foundation's new annual fundraiser, her first one as the event's architect. No auctions, no dinner dates, no bidding paddles raised in the air like judgments. Instead, a Stories of Hope evening where former pediatric patients and their families shared what the children's wing meant to them. Claire wanted donors to give because they believed, not because they were entertained. When she arrived at the hotel ballroom, volunteers were already bustling around with checklists and microphones. At the back of the room, Ethan stood by a table of name tags talking to the executive director. He wore a simple gray suit, nothing flashy, blending into the crowd instead of towering above it. He saw her before she saw him. The warmth in his eyes traveled across the room like a small, steady light, but he didn't approach. Not yet. He knew this was her night. Claire walked through the space, checking every detail. The guests arrived slowly, families, former patients, board members, local business owners. Soft piano music drifted across the room. There was a sense of gentleness, of shared purpose. When the program began, Claire stepped onto the stage. No bright spotlight, just her, the microphone, and rows of people listening. Tonight she began, we're not bidding on evenings or experiences. We're listening. We're honoring the families who walked hallways many of us never see. We're celebrating courage, resilience, and the quiet heroes among us. A few people dabbed at their eyes. She invited families to share their stories, parents who fought impossible battles, teenagers who survived surgeries, siblings who grew up spending weekends in hospital rooms. Laughter mingled with tears, hope mingled with loss. Then, Claire introduced a new initiative. A year ago, a family lost their son Daniel, she said gently. They told us the hardest part wasn't just the illness, it was the cost of traveling back and forth for treatment. They wanted no other family to face that alone. So tonight we are creating the Daniel Pierce Travel Fund to support families who need help getting to the care their children deserve. Applause filled the room, soft at first, then rising like a tide. Ethan watched her from the back, his expression unguarded, proud, in a way that wasn't about possessing her, but witnessing her becoming. After the event officially closed, people lingered. Claire moved between conversations easily, laughing with families, shaking hands, collecting stories for next year's planning. Eventually, the crowd thinned, the lights dimmed, and the chatter faded into silence. She felt a familiar presence beside her. You were extraordinary tonight, Ethan said quietly. Claire smiled. The stories were extraordinary. I just introduced them. He shook his head. You built this. You made space for voices this place had forgotten. His voice held no grand gesture, just sincerity. She exhaled, feeling warmth settle into her chest. Thank you. Ethan reached into his jacket and pulled out a simple white envelope. I have something for you, he said. Not for the foundation. For you? She frowned slightly but accepted it. Inside was a single page, a donation commitment form. A truly significant donation, far more than he had ever given before to the Daniel Pierce Travel Fund. But what stole her breath wasn't the number. It was the dedication line, in memory of Mark Hayes, with respect for the man who shaped the woman I love. Claire's fingers trembled. No one in her life, not the hospital, not friends, not coworkers, had ever honored Mark out loud. Over the years, he had faded into whispered past tense, into awkward condolences, into something that lived only in her chest. But here, in Ethan's careful handwriting, Mark was remembered. Not as a tragedy, not as a widow's burden, but as a man who mattered. Claire pressed the paper to her chest, tears rising softly. Ethan, her voice broke. I don't even know what to say. You don't have to say anything. His eyes were gentle. I'm not giving this to compete with your past. I'm giving it because your past is part of you. And I want to honor all of you, not just the pieces that fit into my life. A tear slipped down her cheek. He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and brushed the tear with his thumb. She leaned into his hand ever so slightly. In that quiet corner of the ballroom, two people, shaped by grief, rebuilt by time, softened by love, the world felt still. Not perfect, not fixed, but steady. And as she looked at him, Claire realized something tender and terrifying. He didn't want to erase her past to build a future with her. He wanted to build a future that had room for all the pieces of her life, including the ones she once thought she had to hide. Her breath shivered out of her. Stay with me, she whispered, unsure if she meant for tonight or for always. Ethan nodded softly. Always. In whatever way you want. Claire closed her eyes for a moment, letting the weight of that promise settle. Some love stories weren't grand. Some didn't begin with fireworks. Some were built slowly in moments like this, quiet, steady, deeply earned. And hers, she realized, was one of them. The night was cool enough for sweaters, warm enough to leave the porch door open. A soft breeze rustled the birch tree in Claire's backyard, brushing gentle fingers across the wooden planks under their feet. Claire sat curled beneath a throw blanket, a mug of chamomile tea warming her hands. Ethan sat beside her, their knees touching beneath the fabric steam, drifting slowly from his cup. There was nothing special about tonight, no gala, no donors, no expectations. Just the two of them, on her small back porch, beneath a sky peppered with early spring stars. These were her favorite nights now. Quiet, unperformed, unbought, they talked the way people did when there was no need to impress about Micah's latest science project, about the stubborn raccoon that kept getting into her trash bins, about the new clinic she planned to partner with in Willow Creek. And then, gently, the conversation drifted where both of them had known it might eventually. Back to that night. The gala, Claire said softly, watching her own breath fade into the night air. I still think about it more than I want to. Ethan didn't move, didn't interrupt. He simply waited. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, she continued, and I can hear Tyler laughing. Or I feel the heat of the spotlight, or I see the look on people's faces when your bid landed. It's strange how moments you don't choose stay with you. He nodded slowly. I know. A pause. If I could go back, I'd do it differently. I'd stop the auction before they ever called your name. I wouldn't let them put you up there like that. He said it with no self-defense. No excuses. Just truth. Claire turned her head to look at him, surprised not by the words, but by the heaviness behind them. She reached out, resting her hand lightly over his. Maybe you would, she said, and maybe we would have saved ourselves a lot of pain. She smiled barely. But if you stopped it, we might never have ended up at that little restaurant by the river. You might never have told me the truth. I might never have walked into that boardroom and finally said what needed to be said. He blinked as if she'd shown him a door he hadn't known existed. I don't forgive the humiliation, she added quietly. No one deserves what happened on that stage. No one should be reduced to a spectacle. But, she hesitated, then exhaled. I'm grateful for what I learned about myself afterward. Ethan listened as though the night itself had stilled for her words. And what did you learn? He asked softly. That I wasn't broken, she said, voice steady. Just quiet. And that I didn't need saving. I needed to hear my own voice again. She looked back out across the yard. That auction didn't give me dignity. Speaking for myself did. A long silence settled, gentle, deep, unthreatening. Ethan reached for her hand beneath the blanket. Not gripping, not claiming, just offering. She intertwined her fingers with his. You know, she murmured, leaning her head slightly toward him, you were right about something. Only one thing, he teased softly. She nudged him with her shoulder. Don't push your luck. They both smiled, the kind of smile that came from a year of slow rebuilding, not from sudden sparks. Then Ethan said almost humorously, for the record, if anyone asked me now what I paid for that dinner, I'd tell them the truth. Claire raised an eyebrow. What's that? He turned his head toward her, the porch light catching the faintest trace of softness in his eyes. Every scared part of my pride, he said, and every night since. Choosing you on purpose. Her breath hitched not from surprise, but from the quiet certainty in his voice. A certainty she had not dared to imagine a year ago. Slowly, she rested her head on his shoulder. He shifted just slightly, so she fit there, as though she had always belonged. They sat like that, listening to the whisper of leaves, the distant hum of a passing car, the gentle clink of their cooling teacups. The night felt honest, ordinary, sacred in its ordinariness. Claire closed her eyes and let the truth settle over her. The auction had forced her onto a stage she never wanted. But the woman she became afterward, the one who spoke up, stood firm, demanded respect. That woman had stepped off that stage by choice. And the life she had now, this back porch, this steady love, this quiet strength, no one could have bid on it. No one could have bought it. No one could have orchestrated it into existence. It was earned. By healing, by courage, by honesty, by time. Ethan pressed a kiss to the top of her head, light as breath, warm as promise. Claire kept her eyes closed and whispered into the night, barely audible, This is the night no one paid for. And the porch fell beautifully silent again. Sometimes healing begins in the places we once tried so hard to avoid. Claire's story reminds us that dignity isn't something people give us. It's something we reclaim, often in the quiet moments after the world has mistaken our worth. She stood on a stage she never asked for, under lights she never wanted, and still somehow found the courage to speak for herself when it mattered most. And maybe that's the heart of it. Life can bruise us with things we didn't choose. Loss, judgment, gossip, the feeling of being unseen. But it can also offer unexpected doors, people who grow conversations that free us, and moments that show us who we've become. Healing doesn't always look like triumph. Sometimes it looks like a woman on a back porch, choosing honesty, choosing herself, and choosing love that doesn't need a spotlight to be real. May we all remember that our worth is never up for auction. Thank you for spending this time with us. Stories like Claire's remind us how powerful compassion and dignity can be. And we're grateful you chose to listen today. Every like, every share, every comment is more than support for this channel. It's a way to help these gentle stories reach someone who might need a moment of understanding, a moment of healing. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to subscribe so you can continue walking with us through more moments that speak to the soul. Thank you for being here with us. Every like, share, and subscribe helps us tell more stories that touch the soul.